Welcome to a Men of His Word audio recording. Men of His Word is a conference that equips Christian men to take a leadership role within their family, congregation, and community. Go to menofhisword.org to find information on upcoming conferences and resources. This breakout session, Help Those Who Grieve, was given in Oshkosh on February 17th, 2024. Pastor Kurt Ebert currently serves at Christ Alone Lutheran Church in Mequon. He has been a Wells Parish pastor for 38 years.
I love the theme that we have for today, built to serve. And so this presentation is designed to be one aimed at helping you to truly do something very important in the lives of people that you will come across in your life, and that is to be the comforter, which not everybody is comfortable with. And maybe that's why we're here together, is just to talk a little bit about the mechanics of being God's comforter in this world. I just came from a presentation, and I'm going to mess the quote a little bit, but where Pastor Don Thompson was reminding us that nothing bad, nothing dark happens needlessly. And I thought that was such a powerful insight for what we're about to talk about, that God does not allow grief, pain, tears to happen for no reason at all. He's got a plan for every single thing that happens in our lives. We looked at Romans 8:28. All things, God says, are working for the good of those who love him. So there's a bit of theology that goes behind being a comforter that I'd like to engage with you in this morning for a few minutes. So we'll follow this outline that we've got. I did not put anything on PowerPoint because I think this is one of those topics that probably is better just spoken. Let me begin just by saying you can do this. You can do this. Like so many things in life, you may feel like you are not. There's a reason why you didn't become a counselor or you didn't become a pastor, because maybe this kind of stuff really bothers you. I had an elder in my last church, great guy, wonderful Christian, but he said, "Pastor, do not take me to the hospital with you when you go to visit." He said, I can't stand being around sick people. So, all right. Well, there was this little block. I don't know where it came from in his mind. Maybe you feel that way when it comes to people who are grieving too. But I'd like to start out just by reminding you, you can do this. Not only that, God has a great place for you to do this. Think of that passage. I put down the passage of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, where God says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ." If you know anything about the ministry of comfort to other people, it's because you've experienced the ministry of comfort. And those of you whose hair looks a little bit like mine, you've probably experienced more of it in your life because you've had to go through a lot of stuff. I used to be amazed when I would go to the nursing home and they're talking to some of these wise old saints and get talking about the history of their life and hear them talking about this child that was killed in a car accident years ago, or this divorce they went through, or the bankruptcy they had to declare, or the cancer that their loved one had to fight and die from. And they never cried. Almost never. And I always, especially as a young pastor, I was all over the place. I would cry for everybody's funeral. And I was kind of amazed that these people were just kind of matter of fact. And I thought, what is wrong with these people? Are they just hearts of stone by this time? And it took me a while to figure it out. Oh no, they don't have hearts of stone. They have warm hearts. But they're hearts that God has toughened over time through circumstances and by the power and ministry of his comfort. And it has allowed them to keep getting out of bed every day and taking another step forward without being so debilitated by the stuff that has happened from living in a sin-infested world that they can't function. And that was where a light went on for me that I thought, this is a great thing. It never went on for me so brightly as when I went through my own period of fairly deep grief. And if you know my name at all, it may be because it got out there, I know. 16 years ago, my 16-year-old son committed suicide. It was the worst day of my life. And there was a period in which I really didn't believe I would get out of bed. And all the things you think about with grief, the anger, the numbness, the questioning God, was all right there. And for at least a brief time, I considered leaving the ministry because I thought, well, I can't do this. How can I begin to help other people when I myself am just a basket case? And there was a time, too, when I felt like, man, if somebody had offered to come up in a parking lot and shoot me, I think I would say, thank you. Just put me out of my misery. Many of you have been through severe grief, and you have tasted of that, the pain that doesn't go away. But I look back, and if I can talk kind of matter-of-factly about my son's death right now, 16 years later, it's to the glory of God, and with many thanks for the people that he has put in my life. Because it doesn't always turn out that way. There are people who grieve literally to death, and they never heal. And maybe it's because of some of the habits they develop during their grieving period, escapism type habits that have to do with drugs or alcohol or other things. Maybe just alienating the people around them. In essence, their life kind of comes to an end. And it doesn't have to be that way. But I first of all give thanks to God, who is the God of all comfort, who did bring me through. And then I thank God for the many, many masks in my life. I thought that was such a wonderful point that Dr. Berg made this morning, too. God just hides behind you. And he does it because he honors you and says, you're my voice. You are my hands. You are my face in this world. You are my voice of comfort to other people. And so I'm reflecting in this presentation, I'll be reflecting a little bit on some of the people who were those masks in my life. If I could give an outline of some of the ways in which you will be a great help to get people to a point where maybe they too can look back a bit objectively at their grief and say, yeah, boy, that was a rough time in my life. I'm so glad that I can keep moving. And it never fully goes away. We don't have an expectation that we're going to be free of sorrow until finally we're in glory and there will be no more tears. But it doesn't have to be debilitating grief either. I think that's what Paul was saying when he said, I would not have you grieve like those who have, what? No hope. That has made all the difference. So, how can you help make that happen? I would hold this before you as a bit of an outline. One is with your quiet presence. And both those words are important. One of the best examples of this, I think, is in the book of Job. 42 chapters long, the story of his horrific trial. Take up chapters 1 and 2. And after that, you got this big middle section of this debate going on between Job and God, and then Job and his friends about why this horrific thing happened in his life. And you got it. Just look at those first words. When Job's 3 friends Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite heard about all the troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. I can't remember which professor told me this, but when we were going through this back at the seminary, I remember him saying, that's when those friends were at their best. Before they ever opened up their mouth. But man, think of what they did. They met together. They had a plan. They said, man, our friend, he's dying here. Satan is hammering this friend of ours. We got to go and be with him. And they made a plan. They traveled from wherever just to come and be with him and to mourn. Without saying a word. And what's really interesting when you read that book is after the 7 days were up, that's when Job finally got to the point of saying, I wish I hadn't been born. Cursed be that day. But it's like finally, it took that long before he could finally even say something. Because he had friends there who were listening. And he desperately needed them to be there to hear him say, I curse the day I was born. We'll talk a little bit about how to respond or how not to respond. But I think the key for us is don't be afraid of those who are grieving. You've got people who have gone through some very, very terrible sorrow in their lives. They don't even know what their brain is doing. They don't know how to think. They don't know how to talk. They just know that they wish they were dead right now. And you may be the one to sit in the ashes with them and just sit. I don't know how that looks. Does it take the form of saying, hey, can I just go out for coffee with you? And truly just drink coffee. Does it, maybe it would be an opportunity to come over to their house? I don't know. I'm not sure how it looks. But I know they need you. I heard a story about a woman who she went through a terrible loss in her life, and she was at work within weeks of the funeral, and somebody made a comment saying, boy, you're really doing great. And she said, oh, no. If I were doing great right now, I'd throw myself down on the floor. I would kick, I would scream, I would cry, I would curse, but none of you would get that. And so I go to my cubicle and I do my job and I go home. Do you hear what she's saying? I can't be real with you. I guess I'm asking you to go ahead and allow somebody to be real. Assume that that's exactly how they feel when they've been through grief. And just to be there counts for so much. Now, you might say, well, that's way too easy. I would say, first of all, it's going to cost you time to do this. And yeah, you're going to have to take time out of your calendar to just say, I want to be engaged. It may also take some time before you're permitted to be engaged and not to give up on that when you shoot somebody a text or give a phone call or whatnot and say, I really still want to get together with you whenever it works. You mean that much to me. Yeah. And then, let's face it, it's not easy being with sick people. And it's not easy being with emotionally sick people who easily break down and cry, or they don't say a thing. I mean, what's the problem with men? You know, you put a group of women around a table, they're pretty good at saying, oh, I feel broken. Life is horrible. It's like God has blessed women with this little talking piece in their brain that is harder to shut off. But guys often clam up and they won't let on. And our culture teaches them, as you know, to have a stiff upper lip and to go back to work and just keep busy. Meanwhile, there's something going on inside. And I think if you can approach them with that understanding, yeah, there's more to this than just a guy saying, oh, I'll be all right. You're doing a favor for them by letting them be real. But that is a time-consuming thing. By the way, don't be afraid to interrupt anywhere in here. This is not just a monologue. I'm happy to speak to questions or comments. Let's go on to the second one, though. With your sympathetic tears. I think it's interesting that even the book of Proverbs tells us, even in laughter, the heart may ache. Don't allow the surface to be the final word when somebody has experienced a loss. And I've kind of leaped into this without really defining what grief is. Grief is losing something. Or grief results from losing something that's valuable to you. This gentleman has led some grief groups. He said somebody came into his grief group and they lost their rabbit. Yeah. Was that it? Yeah, and you and I might laugh at that. For him, he was grieving. For whatever reason, that rabbit was very, very important. What other kinds of things might people be grieving? Got some ideas? I mean, the obvious one, of course, is a human being that's very precious to you. A son, a daughter, a wife, a parent. Say again?
Career.
Your career? Yeah, you're used to being busy. Says the guy who has to possibly announce his retirement this Tuesday. Who told me, this was a classmate of mine, Neil, and he told me that he was planning to work another 5 years, at least at one point, right? Your health. Yeah, you're not young anymore, you old guys. I can talk that way because I'm realizing that. Yeah. And suddenly life is changing. You can't do the stuff that you wanted to do before. What else? Yeah. Divorce, boy. And whether it was your choice or the other's choice probably doesn't make too much difference. You committed yourself to this at one time, and now it's gone. Could be, yes, sir. Yeah, you lost your security, right? Maybe you thought your investments were fine, and it didn't work that way. Yeah.
Let's say your kids turn their back on God.
What a tough one that one is. When your kids, you had such visions for your kids following in your faith-filled footsteps, and then they come home and say, I really don't believe that anymore. Oh. Yes, sir. All right. It's easy to say, right? Oh, the Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Until all your memories are tied up in a home and you're watching it burn up. Or you had to sell the home, lose it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Having a son that you've adopted, and 15 years later, he commits a crime and is sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Wow. So the son that you poured your heart and soul into and your parenting seems to have turned his back on righteousness, or at least on a civil lifestyle, and now has lost his life to prison. Yeah, I have an occasion to preach and teach in our local jail in Oshkosh County. Can't tell you how many times the guys or the gals there are sitting there. You'd think, well, what do they want, to have with some preacher with a tie on or whatnot? But man, they are listening, and they are crying. And they're thinking about that 2-year-old that's at home that is celebrating a birthday this weekend, and they can't be there for it, and it was their fault. All because of stupid drugs or whatever it was. Oh, so they're grieving. It's like, what do I do with this thing? Yeah.
I had a woman once who lost her husband, and we understand her grief. But in her grief, her family could not understand why it was so profound. So they turned their back on her. In fact, by the time they brought her to me, they were going to institutionalize her.
Oh.
And because they thought she was going crazy. So the loneliness of grief was compounded by being alone.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so she came into class, and after one session, she said, I no longer feel alone. It was profound.
Wasn't that something?
Yeah, and after 4 classes, she wrote a note that I was able to pass on to the church leadership. It says, you have saved my life. She meant the class, but it's profound. But it's that loneliness that comes with grief, where you're the only one suffering. But when you share it with others, and they realize they're not alone, it's like a person floating in an ocean. They reach out, but there's no one there to reach back until you pull them out of the water.
What a keen insight that is. Just not being alone in your grief. Well, emphasizes what these 3 friends of Job were doing was a good thing. Yeah. You mentioned the word crazy because they thought she was going crazy. Yeah, absolutely. You do feel, I've had so many people tell me that when they're going in the midst of grief, they feel like their brain is becoming disconnected, like they are going crazy. They can't focus. They can't go to work. They can't handle simple numbers. They forget everything that they've learned. I'd have to say, too, if I can just give a personal account, I used to be pretty good at memory work. And I took a little bit of, it might have been overweening pride, I don't know, but some pride in memorizing Psalms. I think at one time I could rattle off like 30 Psalms for you if I wanted to. Do you know that to this day, ever since Nathan died, I can hardly resurrect 2 or 3 of them. And I have to work at it, and it's like they just don't stick. Now, part of that is probably from getting old. But I noticed that almost immediately. My brain could not take in information. Whew. Do you think it's important to have family around you who says, hey, we get that? or friends who say, you don't have to be the guy that you used to be. I get this. You've been through trauma in your life. It's like PTSD. This is terrible. But you don't have to be there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I wonder how you reach a case where that, similar to that, who lost her husband, and she withdrew and going through all kinds of medical things and depression, but doesn't want to face it. She tried, and not real faith, or not church oriented at all. She doesn't have that. But I don't know how to. You can see the problem, just like you said, loss and depression. But how do you pull them out of that if you can't?
Yeah.
I don't want to do.
You're not God. You can't be God. You can't do godly things. But I shouldn't say that. You can do godly things. But I think we're starting with the thought: just love, presence, love, compassion. We'll talk about a little bit more. This thought of sympathetic tears. I will always be grateful for this guy. He was a softball player that had been an adult convert in my congregation at the time, and just big guy, loved hanging out, and he loved sports. But on that day, when I came to church after the word got out that my son had killed himself, I stood at the doorway to the church for people to greet me and my family, and he came and he just had tears streaming down his face, and he wrapped me in these big softball player arms, and he gave me a big kiss on the cheek, which was a real surprise to me. I wasn't expecting that. But I will always remember him because that's the only thing he did to comfort me. He didn't try to say anything. He just kissed me and wrapped me in his love and his tears. Yeah, boy, that lifted a burden from me that day, knowing that he knew a little bit about my pain, or at least he was sympathetic. With your gentle questions and listening ears, I say gentle questions because they may be very, very simple. And there's maybe some that are more helpful than others, but like saying, hey, I wonder if there's something we can do for you. Any jobs you need getting done around the house or anything? I know you're hurting. Any load I can take off your plate, just let me know. And just to listen. And I would say also listen without correcting. Job, like I say, the first thing Job said was, I hate my life. I wish I were dead. And can you imagine a counselor saying, oh, Job, that's not really good. You're not really appreciating God's gift to you at this time. And yada, yada, yada. Oh, no. I think a good listener would say, man, I bet. You don't have to correct people's theology in the depth of their grief. People say stupid things even under good circumstances. But when you're hurting, man, you hate God. Truly. I'm glad nobody saw me when I was out in the plains of I was in Colorado at the time, and one day it's a friend, high school professor or teacher had invited us over to his house, and the closer we got to his house, the more I just said to Connie, I can't do this. I'm a basket case today. Why don't you go be with him, and I'll just drive away. And I did that, and I found out there's these little dry arroyos and whatnot all over the front range of Colorado, and I found one of those. It was a park, but nobody was around, and so I drove down there, and I just walked down into this arroyo, and I just started screaming. Screaming and crying. And a lot of it were those questions, like, why? God, why? What are you thinking? And just getting angry at him. Well, like I say, I'm glad, my friends weren't there or somebody to say, don't question God. He knows what he's doing. It's like this came out of the depths of my heart. And I needed to do it. And I felt better afterwards. But let's show grace to people. Like I say, you don't have to correct their theology. Not for a long, long time. Eventually, maybe. Eventually. Well, and maybe just a comment here. We'll return to this thought. You also don't have to make them feel better. I think that's a mistake to try to think, what can I say to make them feel better? Ooh, they don't want to feel better. Somebody in the depth of grief, they want to be able to grieve. They want to cry. Cry with them. Just cry with them. With your fond remembrances, this I found to be really helpful. Using the name of the one who died. It's good to hear you haven't forgotten. To be able to say, hey, I've been thinking about whoever. I've been thinking about your wife and how she died a year ago today. And, she put a big smile on my face. When I think of her, I think of da-da-da-da-da. I'll tell you, those remembrances are like music to your ears. There was a pastor out in Denver who did this because he had my son for catechism class back in the day. And I had never heard this before, but he said, can I tell you a little bit about what he was like in class? And, and some of this crazy look he'd get in his eye once in a while when he was thinking about a theological question and whatnot, and some of the comments he made. Oh, thank you for that. The thing is, most people don't like talking about the dead. And why? Because they're afraid they're going to set you off. And it's easier just to kind of have this thought, well, we're just going to move on with life. Well, the person in grief is not moving on. You can bet they're thinking. All those anniversaries and things, birthdays, celebrations, yeah, they're thinking a lot. Yes?
You bring up a good point. So many times in our loss, we're afraid that our loved one is going to disappear, that people will forget that. And one of the rules we have in class is that they have to use their loved one's name. Rather than my husband or my wife, which is rather impersonal. Old Bob. I sure miss old Bob. He used to do this or that, because it makes them real. And so when we talk, or when we as a group would comfort someone, we would want to say, well, I really miss Bob. And I'm really sad about Bob's loss. And use his name constantly, or her name, so that people realize that they're not going to be forgotten, particularly after the grief, after the first few months of grief.
What a keen insight that is, too. Yeah. Interestingly, I've heard that from many people, that they are scared that they cannot remember what their loved one's voice sounded like. That suddenly it's getting out of their head. And they feel like they're betraying the memory of their loved one because they can't remember that. Or, yeah, there's things about them, events in the life that they think, I can't remember. What a wonderful favor it is when you help them remember something. Or if they do have a favorite story to tell, to be able to say, hey, could you tell me more about what he or she was like? Tell me what you loved most. I know in our grief group, sometimes we would say, share one happy memory about this person in your life. And I'll tell you, they light up. People light up because the telling is very important. The reciting of the past, it keeps it real for them and makes them realize they're not going crazy. I'm sorry, did you have? No, okay. With your out loud prayers, I don't know if you feel comfortable ever praying out loud, but I've had people ask me to do that, I suppose because I'm a pastor. Or even sometimes just on the phone when somebody's going through a hard time, and I'll just ask, would it be all right if I just prayed for you right now? And most of the time people say, yeah, please do. I haven't done that my whole ministry, praying on the phone, but in my later years, I've learned people really, they do appreciate an immediate prayer. And to hear them pray for your friend, to hear them pray for the memory of their loved one, and thank God for this person in their lives, again, it helps them feel whole. We're getting into an area, too, just dealing with grief itself. What does grief actually do? By God's grace, grief takes you to a point of normalcy, from abnormalcy to normalcy. Some of you may have heard, there was a book written years ago by a well-known doctor who talked about the five stages of grief that starts with shock and disbelief and becomes anger. Before it becomes anger, I forget them in order. But bargaining comes after the second one. Acceptance is at the bottom. Well, so you got, yeah. I should have had this at my fingertips, but yeah. So disbelief, anger, bargaining with God. What can I do? Depression, just sorrow, and then finally to this place of saying, okay, this is my new life. My new normal is here. That's the acceptance. And someone has rightly said, there's no way around grief. One way or another, you're going to grieve. The question is how you're going to grieve. Are you going to grieve successfully or unsuccessfully? And so rather than trying to go around grief, like with drugs and alcohol or denial or whatever it is, you're going to have to go through it. Like going through the valley of the shadow of death. You're going to have to go through it. But the going through it, and this is something that has been universally found, is so much easier when you can talk. When you talked before about a family saying that her family members were just saying, "Oh, she's crazy. We got to put her away." I bet if they had just sat around in the living room and said, "Hey, we all hurt for you. So bad, so bad." And we're wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about what's going on inside right now. I bet she would have loved that the closest people in her life just want to hear her. When I do a grief group, again, a lot of grief group, maybe you found the same thing, is just encouraging people to talk because they don't have anybody else who will listen to them. That's a shame that nobody else will listen to them. But so often they come to a grief group because they can't tell people at work because they'll look like they're dysfunctional if they do that. They can't tell the kids, right? You don't want to scar the kids with your own sorrows and whatnot, although I think a lot of kids are far more capable of helping them handle grief than what they realize. Yeah. So you may be that person to help draw them out. Tell me, just talk to me. Yeah.
Down the road too, it's not immediate, but down the road, what we do towards the end of our sessions, which I told you were 13, I try and get, as you say, have everybody bring in a happy memory. And a lot of times around the table, we'll end up laughing at some of the memories. And it gives a facilitator a chance to talk to them about that. But the way I compare that is moving them away from the coffin to look at their life and realize their life was full of joy and grace and mercy and love. Don't focus on this short window of overwhelming grief. It's not taking it away, but it is also intermingling it with a lot of happiness, a lot of joy, and a lot of wonderful life that we tend to forget in our grief.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that point is especially true because we tended, in our group, because of my experience, we focus on suicide grief, which has got some unique things about it. But one of the maxims there is don't let that one moment of their life define their life as if, oh, they're a suicide case. There was a lot of happiness, a lot of laughter, a lot of joy. It wasn't all about that one horrific moment in which they chose to end their life. Yeah. A couple other, I want to make sure we have time to go through. We go until what? 12:15. Okay, good. With your behind the scenes help, oh man, there was so much. After my son died, I was just in a fog, and so many people just came. I realize there's advantages in being a pastor because you got a lot of, your posse is pretty big, but I have no idea who cleaned the carpet in our living room or called the carpenters to come and replace it later, or who cut the lawn, or who got the meals ready, or who paid bills during this time in which my brain was just not functional. It was just an amazing thing. Who organized the funeral? People just stepped up, and that is, I look back and I think I was lifted up on eagle's wings, which is really the people of God. With your wise understanding of the grieving process, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but don't be surprised that it is long-term. I remember a friend of mine saying, my brother, it's been a year since he lost his wife, and he still is walking around like he's so sad and not getting together with people. And I felt like saying, in grief year, how dog years are different from people years? I think grief years are different from people years too. It's like a year is a month. It seems like it was just yesterday, and everybody's on their own schedule. There is a place, and counselors will say that too, if a person doesn't seem to be talking at all or at a place where he can experience some community, yeah, you might have to give him a little push in that direction. But don't push the timetable with people who are grieving. I had one woman come to our session whose, I think it was a daughter of hers, had killed herself like 20 years before. And she just broke down and cried. You think grief is alive? Was it expected or sudden? That might make a little difference. You notice that not all grief is the same. When my parents died, I was sad, but I don't think I cried very much for them. It had a full life, and my dad had gotten sick at the end. I was kind of glad he could finally be in heaven. And then my mom, I was kind of glad that she could join him because it's like her heart was broken. And she was in great health, but the Lord one night just took her. I was happy for her. Is it old age or is it tragic? That can make a difference too. It's not linear, and we could spend all day on this one. But when I talked before about those 5 stages, plus I've seen many more stages than that. You might think, well, this is a nice, neat kind of horseshoe. You start here, you go down, and then you go back up, and finally you're at the acceptance stage. And the experience of many is, oh no, it's all over. The line is going like this, and one day you're feeling a little better. The next day you're just in the depths of despair and angry at God again, or questioning God's justice and being, and that's just the way it is until God finally allows you a little leeway, a little grace. On a chart that I usually show, I wanted to bring that today and I didn't, but that I sometimes show our grief group, there's one segment called A Glimmer of Light, which in the middle of all this anger and depression and sorrow and questioning and numbness, one day you wake up. And again, a kind of a common experience, you're not crying. In fact, maybe you even went through a day without thinking about your loved one. I remember asking my wife, it's about a year later that I had my first day of sunshine, I would say. And it's not that I couldn't function during that time, but I certainly was constantly weighed down. And on that day, I said to my wife, I said, have you noticed that like it's a little brighter outside? Like you're feeling a bit better? And she said, oh no, it's getting worse for me. And she had to wait another year before she could have her moment of lightness. I think it's just good to be aware. This is a long-term thing and it's not linear, and don't think it's ever, if you've had to go through grief or if you do have to go through grief, just expect that it's going to be a real hodgepodge, ups and downs. Yes, sir.
I just want to say thank you for that because dealing with my father-in-law's passing, he died in August and we would go hunting together. He retired, bought 62 acres of land, and I spent countless hours, blood, sweat, and tears, literally clearing trails and all that stuff. And so we went hunting, and we would go hunting with him. And I'm walking out opening weekend with a rifle that he literally built for me.
Wow.
I'm thinking, I'm just going to be a mess. I'm going to be a mess. And I was fine. And it kind of terrified me because I thought, I should really be a mess right now. I should really, just put the gun down and just sit there and cry in my deer stand because that's probably what's going to happen. And it didn't. So thank you for that it's not linear, because I know that, but it's one thing to know it in your head. It's another thing to know it in your heart. And so appreciate
He gave you a little glimmer of light out in the woods.
Right.
That was a wonderful thing.
Unfortunately, it wasn't a 12-point buck.
Yes, sir.
The other thing that can happen too in our grief is we can have a very good day, and then all of a sudden we're sad. And is there something wrong with me because of that? We call that being ambushed by grief. And it could be a song. It can be a light in the sky. I often say wind coming through the curtains in the kitchen can trigger that in me. And any number of things can trigger it. But all of a sudden you're sad and you said, there's something wrong with me. I'm not getting better. But being ambushed by grief is very natural. My brother died 10 years ago. And every so often I just get really sad to think, I'd like to call my brother. And I can't. He's gone. And so people get afraid of that, but that's very normal to have a good day when you think you're not. And then maybe tomorrow something will hit you, and then all of a sudden you'll be really sad.
Isn't that something? Oh boy, that ambush. My son, before he died, he was a guitarist, and he was working on a song for a talent show at school. Again, kind of a weird thing. And it was, does anybody know the song "Hey There, Delilah"? Does it? Well, I didn't know that, except that he was working on it, and I did. And so I'm at Home Depot, and suddenly "Hey There, Delilah" plays, and I'm just going, oh. And it's like suddenly I'm taken away to a new place or an old place. Isn't that something? Smells can do that sometimes too. Holidays certainly can do that. Memories. Yeah. It's very individual. You got to appreciate this passage from the book of Proverbs 14. Each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joy. I suppose my caution here would be when somebody is grieving, you probably don't want to say, man, I know what you're going through. Even if you've been through something like it. Everybody's got a different context for their grief. And that's not necessarily comforting to have somebody say, I know what you're going through, as much as I hurt for you. And then the presence of guilt. Again, this was one of those big things with suicide that maybe makes suicide grief especially poignant, is that everybody's asking, why didn't I see this coming? What did I do wrong? What did I say? What didn't I say? The last words we had were a fight, whatever. And guilt can be in wherever there is death, there is bound to be some guilt, some failure, some regrets, that I didn't say something I should have said. I didn't do this act of kindness I should have done. So be aware of that with people, that they desperately need God's grace, as do you and me. And when the time is right, with heavenly words, if you could turn to the third and fourth page, now we could spend a lot of time on these. I put together a list of passages that have meant a lot to me over the years. One of the things that you're going to notice about this is I don't really have any passages that specifically talk about heaven. And that might sound strange, because a huge amount of our comfort comes from knowing that our loved one went to heaven, right? And I would say absolutely, yeah. It's just that on this sheet, my experience has been that widow in the front row is saying, well, that's all fine and good, but I got to wake up tomorrow morning to an empty bed. And I don't even know how I'm going to pay the bills, and I'm totally lost without him. In other words, I think what they need more at that point than the knowledge of heaven, which will definitely be a comfort in the long run, is the knowledge that God is with them and that he'll take care of them. Which is why on the top, go back to the second page. I put down the antithesis of grief may not be joy. Yeah, joy, we know we're going to have joy in heaven. But the antithesis of grief, I think, is hope. And I get that from some of these Bible passages, like where it says, in the second one, Psalm 42, why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. In other words, there's going to come a day when I will once again see the light, when God is going to help me through this. And I have found as a pastor, it's one of the kindest things I can do for people who are just in the throes of loss and grief, is to say, I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but God is here and he's going to get you through it. You're going to smile again. I just want you to know that. Not now, but it's going to happen. It's like, oh, I'm not always going to feel crazy. No.
Pastor,
Yeah.
one of the things we do, and I've gotten the pastors to do it now, is to give the grieving person, widow or widower or whatever, a copy of the sermon, because I know I don't remember the sermon was given on my brothers. And also recommend that they save the cards for appropriate time when they can sit down and really appreciate the kind words that are in them.
Yeah.
Because nothing makes sense when you're in grieving, as you know. And the other thing we suggest too is if the loved one's voice is anywhere on a telephone, on a voicemail, or anything, is to save it. Because you're right, you lose the sound of your loved one's voice. And there's great comfort in that. I saved a woman's voice that called me just before she died, and her son was in my office 2 hours later. And I said, or two years later, I said, would you like to hear your mom's voice? And that's the look I got.
Wow.
And I was able to play it. It was a long message about something. And he says, do you mind if I record that? Because I haven't heard my mom's voice in 2 years. And so if we have them somewhere on our recording devices, their telephone or a voicemail recorder or something like that, I suggest that you get them to hang on to it, because that becomes important later on.
Okay. What a good idea. Yes.
You're exactly right. Mom and Dad passed away January 31st.
A little louder if you would.
My dad passed away January 31st in 16. My mom passed away 13 days later.
Oh,
I have 2 messages that are still on my phone today from my mom. And she was struggling with the loss of Dad. But I still have those today. And I
Isn't
still
that
listen to
wonderful?
them.
Yep.
that voice is so powerful. Yeah, isn't that something? We only have a couple minutes left. What I did, I took these last 2 sheets here, and I just printed them on a 2-sided piece of paper here, thinking that if you're in a position where you know somebody who's in the depths of grief and you want to be able to help them, feel free to take, maybe enough, like I say, for 2 or 3 per person. If you want to take some with you and keep it in a desk drawer somewhere, and say, hey, there was this guy at a conference one time, and he pointed out some of these passages. Do you mind if I give this to you? Or would you like, probably better yet, as you're sitting at Starbucks over your coffee, say, can I just read these with you? And just talk about what they mean to me? The words of God are healing. When my nephew was killed in a car accident at 17 years old, I will always remember sitting in that funeral home and where everybody is just a basket case. And that pastor comes in and says hi to everybody. And then he says, can I just read a section of scripture to you? And that word, I could feel my shoulders just lifting up like there was an angel standing there, just pulling me up as I'm being reminded that God is here and that he gives me hope. And I believe these passages, I think you'll find them. I would appreciate it if you'd read them through. And if you got suggestions for other passages, feel free to send them on to me, that you would say, man, this is a passage that I would use with somebody. But it is finally God's tool to heal us. And I believe that the person who's been given a friend like you is going to be the one who 16 years later can stand in front of a group of people and say, let me tell you about the people who helped me through my grief and allowed me to continue to function and be a help to others. Back Page is one of my favorite grief hymns. You can share that too. I think that's probably all we have time for, huh?
Yeah, it's time.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening. If you found this useful, the greatest gift you can give us is to pass it on to a friend. These recordings are free because of the support of our donors and sponsors. To visit our sponsors, to donate or to volunteer or to find more recordings, go to menofhisword.org. James and Timothy Rudat helped record and edit these episodes, and I am John Rudat, the technical manager for Men of His Word.